welcome to St. Thomas Methodist Church in Plettenberg Bay. The message today is brought to you by Pastor Troy Rist.
Father, as we began singing together this morning, we celebrated who you are. And our song reminded us to think of you as Jehovah Jireh, the God who's our provider, Jehovah Shalom, the God of peace, the God of Abraham, the God of I am, the God of all creation. And so we thank you that we could begin our time together reminding us of the greatness and the majesty of our God here with us. But Father, not just simply as the God of power who overwhelms, but the God who really comes in a very profound, yet also gentle way into our lives at times. The God who holds us close. And as you hold us and as you work with us, as your love flows through us, so as we said, all things are possible in your name. And we didn't sing that with a sense of arrogance or pride, but a statement of faith. We can overcome all things. For you, Jesus, are the one who gives us strength, and you're with us. And so hear us now, Father, as we stand together and we sing to your glory now. To God be the glory, great things he has done. Praise the Lord. Let the earth hear his voice. Let's sing. To God be the glory, great things he has done. So loved he the world that he gave us his Son, who yielded his life as atonement for sin, and opened the life gate that all may go in. Praise the Lord, let the earth hear his voice. Praise the Lord, let the people rejoice. Oh, come to the Father through Jesus the Son, and give him the glory, great things he has done.
Good morning. Good morning. Good to be with all of you this morning. I'm glad Rev Tim started by introducing the figure on my left. I won't let you know what he is or she is just yet. I'm going to let that hanging there. So just a welcome from my side. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Troy. I'm a pastor here at St. Thomas Church, and I'll be sharing the message with you this morning. Lord Jesus, we come before you this morning, not only with our gifts of money, but also with our talents and abilities, that everything you have poured out into our lives for us to use for your glory and your kingdom, Lord. So we present everything of ourselves to you. We say, here we are, Father. Use us as you will for your kingdom, for your power and your glory. We also bring our families for prayer before you this morning. We pray that you bless them and keep them. In Jesus' name, amen. Please have a seat. Please get comfortable. Would anyone like to take a guess as to who that might be? Sorry, I'm hearing some mumbles. It's Goliath. Welcome to Goliath. Goliath has joined the service with us today. And we had to put Goliath there because if we bring him forward, he kind of blocks out the screens and everything. So we shoved him into the corner. I hope you noticed Goliath when you walked into the room. And this is not the first time you are seeing him. But the story today is all about David and Goliath. David and Goliath. I wonder what that story means for you. What that phrase, David and Goliath, means for you. Because it's entered our everyday language, hasn't it? David and Goliath can mean anything from the under 11D rugby team winning against the massive opponents to businesses and corporations, the small businesses taking on the giants like Microsoft and Amazon and winning in their field. David and Goliath has become this term for the underdog overcoming impossible odds and attaining victory. Is that what David and Goliath might mean for you? It's what I always understood David and Goliath to mean. That small girl, that small boy, that little person, somehow facing an impossible giant and winning, getting victory. When I was at Sunday school, the messages always used to go the same. If you have enough faith, and if you trust in God, even though you're small and weak, He'll help you slay that giant, because with God, all things are possible. And that's what I thought David and Goliath meant. I even gave a message or two on David Goliath in that area as well. But I'd like to ask you a question. Is that really what David and Goliath is about? Is it really a story of the underdog? Is it really a story of how even though we're weak, God will help us overcome impossible odds? Because I think we can take a different look at David and Goliath that will give us a different lesson for our lives today. I'm hoping you're ready for your perspective on David and Goliath to possibly shift forever. Are you ready for that? Are you ready to walk out of the service and think, wow, David and Goliath is completely different in my life from now on? See, I came across a journalist and an author by the name of Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote a book on David and Goliath. Like me, he thought he knew the story of David and Goliath. He thought it was the story of the underdog. But as he began, as a journalist and an author, as he began investigating it, his findings led him to conclude something completely different. And he published a book, David and Goliath, which you can get hold of. He's a he's a bestseller, New York Times bestseller for 4 books. So he's a really, really well-known author. And he presented a TED Talk on David and Goliath as well, so you can go and listen to that TED Talk. It's on YouTube. And when I encountered his TED Talk, it completely changed how I saw Goliath. So I'm going to present some of that to you this morning. And once we've re-looked at David and Goliath, I'm then going to be asking you, with that new perspective in mind, with that new understanding, what is the story all about? What is the main lesson that we can take away? Is it an underdog overcoming impossible odds, or is there a different lesson we can take today? So you're ready? You're ready to relook at David and Goliath. So it's from 1 Samuel chapter 17, and now it's the whole of 1 Samuel chapter 17, 54 verses. So I can't read 1 Samuel chapter 17 to you this morning, because that's all we would do. I would literally just read it and say, there's the story, we can go. So what I'm going to be doing is just pulling out sentences here or there as we go along, but I'm just encouraging you, when you get home, please go and read 1 Samuel chapter 17 for yourself and really take in the full biblical narrative. But the story from David and Goliath, it happens in an area called the Shephelah. Now we've got a map here. I hope you can see the map. The Shephelah is where modern-day Israel would be. Now on the left of the map, so my left there, the water is the Mediterranean Sea. And then along the Mediterranean Sea, you've got the coastal plain, which is where Tel Aviv would be now. Then towards the middle of the map, you've got a mountainous area there. That's where Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Bethel are in the mountainous area. And then the water just to the right of the mountains is the Dead Sea. Now what the Shephelah is an area of rivers and valleys that connects the mountains to the Mediterranean Sea. That's what the Shephelah is. And it had a very strategic function during David and Goliath's time. It was how armies from the coastal plain would make their way up into the mountains. So if you're an army on the coastal plain and you want to go and attack Jerusalem, the question is, how do you get up the mountains? Well, you use one of the valleys in the Shephelah to get up into the mountains and to attack them. And that's what happens in David and Goliath, the story. The Philistines are there along the Mediterranean Sea. They want to get up into Bethlehem and attack Bethlehem. They want to split Israel in two, Jerusalem to the north and Bethlehem to the south. And so they begin marching towards the one valley called the Valley of Elah. And the king of Israel, Saul, he catches wind of this, and he was a military strategist, so he knew he could not let the Philistines get to Bethlehem. He has to cut them off. And so he gathers the Israelites together, the Israelite army, and he marches them down into the Valley of Elah as well. And we've got another map there of the Valley of Elah. And so you've got the Philistines on one ridge of the valley. You've then got the valley, and then you've got the Israelites on the other ridge of the valley. And so these two mighty armies are staring at each other across this river, or across this valley, just staring at each other. The problem is neither army can move, because to move would mean you'd have to go from the top of the ridge down into the valley, where you are then in range of the enemy's archers, and they can throw rocks and stones on you. You somehow have to march up the side of the valley, and then you've got that army waiting for you at the top. And so they're at a deadlock. Neither army can move. They're standing at each other, they're staring for hours, for days, maybe for weeks. Neither army can move. And this is where Goliath enters the story. Goliath was the champion for the Philistines. He comes forward and he shouts across to the Israelites. He says, "Choose a champion for yourselves to come and fight me. If your champion wins, we will become your servants. But if I win, you will become our servants. I stand here today and I defy the armies of your God. Choose your champion." The problem is no one in Israel wants to be the champion. No one in Israel is volunteering to take Goliath on. Why? Goliath's a beast. He's a giant. Can I go stand over there for you this morning? That's how tall Goliath was. I got a ladder and a tape measure, and I measured 3 meters tall. Where that helmet is where Goliath's head and his helmet would be. So this is me trying to face Goliath. I wouldn't have volunteered. I don't think I would have volunteered to face Goliath. So I thought, how can I make this a little bit more relevant for us? We all know Eben Etzebeth, right? South African Springbok. He is 2 meters and 3 centimeters tall. That's Eben over there. That's the top of his head. Does anyone want to take a guess at who the tallest rugby player in history ever recorded was? Any rugby fanatics? Richie Metcalf. He is 2 meters and 13 centimeters. There's where Richie would get. Tallest rugby player in history. Anyone want to guess who this is over here? That's Andre the Giant. That's where Andre the Giant, the most famous, I guess, modern day giant is. Goliath would have made them look very, very small, don't you think? Would any of you volunteer to take that on? To take Goliath on? The Israelites see that giant and they say, no, we can't do that. Not only is Goliath incredibly tall, but he's also equipped with the latest in modern warfare. He's got a bronze scale armor on, he's got a bronze helmet on, he's got bronze armor on his arms and his legs on, he's got a javelin across his back, he's got a sword, he's got a spear, and he's got a shield bearer with a full-length standing shield that goes before him. That's the person who is challenging the Israelites to single combat, to fight him one-on-one. And so, as I said, no one in the Israelite army is willing to take him on. And then along comes David. And we'll get into a little bit later about why David is there. But along comes David. And David sees Goliath and he hears the challenge. And David says, who is this Philistine that stands against the armies of the living God? Right? And he volunteers to take on Goliath. A 14-year-old shepherd boy puts up his hand and says, right, I volunteer, I'll do it. I will be the champion for the Israelites. And so he's brought before King Saul, and here's the funny thing. King Saul was possibly the tallest warrior in the army. So who should have actually volunteered to take on Goliath? King Saul. But he doesn't. And so David is brought before King Saul, and King Saul says to David, you can't do this, you are but a youth, and Goliath has been a warrior since his youth. You can't take him on. But David responds, and he says to King Saul, I have killed bears and I've killed lions. My God will help deliver me from this giant. And so King Saul says, well, then take my armor as protection. And David says, I cannot because I have not tested it, right? He's a shepherd boy. He's never worn armor. He puts it on and it's uncomfortable, it's awkward. He doesn't know how to use it. And so he says to King Saul, I can't wear this armor. I'll go with my sling. And so he picks up 5 stones from that valley of Elah area, and he goes down his side of the valley to meet Goliath in the valley. Goliath is led down by the shield bearer, and as Goliath sees David approaching, he shouts out to him and says, am I a dog that you approach me with sticks? Am I a dog that you approach me with sticks? Why does Goliath say that? Well, Goliath is maybe a little bit offended. He was expecting a mighty warrior, dressed in armor, with a javelin and a sword like him. And what does he see? There's this little figure holding sticks coming towards him. So he's offended. Am I a dog? He says to David, come near to me so that I can feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. And David responds to Goliath in a similar manner. He says, today I will be the one feeding your body to the beasts of the field and the birds of the air. I'm going to chop off your head, essentially is what David tells him. And so David begins running towards Goliath. He puts a stone in his sling and he slings it. And most translations say that the stone hits him in the forehead and gets lodged in his skull. And Goliath falls back, either dead or unconscious, we don't know. And then David rushes to him, grabs Goliath's sword, and off with his head. When the Philistines see this, they run in fear. They flee in fear. When the Israelites see this, they're filled with courage and energy, and they rush after the Philistines. The battle is won. The victory is there. That's the story. Is this a story of the underdog? The 14-year-old shepherd boy, only with a sling, going up against this mighty warrior with modern weapons and somehow winning. Is this really a story of the underdog? Well, here's where things get a little bit interesting. You see, in this day, there were three types of soldiers. There were the cavalrymen on horseback and chariots. You had the heavy infantrymen, like Goliath, foot soldiers dressed in armor. And you had the projectiles, those with the bow and arrows, and more importantly, the slingers, like David. And if you go back and you read sort of the historical accounts of the times, there are battles where slingers were the decisive factor in winning against heavy infantrymen. In other words, if you've got an army of infantrymen and you've got slingers, slingers have got the advantage. They're perfectly equipped to take on warriors like Goliath. So already there, we should say, going into this, who should have the slightest advantage here? Well, actually, David should. He's got the perfect weapon to take on a heavy infantryman like Goliath. If we look into the history of the sling, we get a little bit more detail. So there's a picture of the sling. It's a rope or a piece of material, usually about 1 meter long. In the middle was a rock. You can see about the size of your hand was the size of the rock, which you put in the middle. You would rotate it very, very quickly and then let go of one end and the rock would shoot out. But that rock would fly at about 125 kilometers an hour. Can you imagine a rock the size of my hand flying at you at 125 kilometers an hour? That's deadly. Their lethal range was up to 180 meters, much further than a bow and arrow. I got my tape measure out again, and I measured from where I'm standing to the door. That's around about 20 meters at the back there. So you're all in my lethal range if I was a slinger. Goliath was within that 180-meter range, we suspect, because of how they were calling to each other. There are tapestries that show slingers being able to hit birds out of mid-air, in mid-flight. That's how accurate slingers were in their craft. And not only that, David got his rocks from the valley of Elah. And those rocks are not ordinary rocks. They are barium sulfate rocks. They've got twice the density of normal rocks. So if you take the speed, the accuracy, the distance, and the density of the rock, and you put that all together and you say, how much force would that rock have hit Goliath with? The one speculation is it would have hit with a similar stopping power as a bullet from a 45-millimeter handgun. That's the stopping power that would have hit Goliath in the forehead. Now, I know nothing about guns. Honestly, that means nothing to me, but I understand that that is quite a powerful handgun. Now, the rock wouldn't have impacted Goliath or done the same amount of damage as a bullet. Obviously, a bullet would have damaged him differently, but it would have hit that same amount of force in the forehead. I'd like to ask here, do you think David perhaps brought a gun to a sword fight? Right? Did David bring a gun to a sword fight? David has got a highly deadly weapon, which he knows how to use. He's killed lions, he's killed bears in protection of his sheep. He knows how to use it. He's going up against Goliath. David was a very deadly warrior with a very deadly weapon. So let's ask about Goliath then. How deadly was Goliath? Well, we know 3 meters tall. I think Goliath might have weighed around 200 kilograms. Why do you think he weighed 200 kilograms? Well, honestly, I just went onto a body mass index calculator on Google, and I put in 3 meter tall male, around 30 years old. That's what the speculation is. It gave me a huge range of weight, and I just took the average, which was 200 kilograms. So it's really just a guesstimate, a guess figure, around 200 kilograms. But I mean, Ibn Etzebeth weighs about 130, and look, he's at his sort of belly button. So I don't think that's too far off, right? He weighs around about 200 kilograms. The chest plate on Goliath alone, just the chest plate, weighed around 55 kilograms. Now, if you don't think that's heavy, I've got a CrossFitter's weighted vest there that weighs 20 kilograms, and I've got a kettlebell that weighs 32 kilograms. Thank you to Joanne and her family for providing that. So that's about 52 kilograms there. I'm inviting all of you strong men and women after the service to please come forward, put that vest on, pick up the kettlebell and think, okay, that's the weight that's just on Goliath's chest. That's just on his chest. We know the bronze helmet is another couple kilograms, the bronze arm on his arms and legs, another couple kilograms, his sword would be another couple kilograms, the spear as well, his javelin, we guess is weighing around about 15 kilograms. All of that on his body that he's carrying, we can say he weighed maybe close to 100 kilograms on him, restricting his movements. Goliath is big, and he's also very slow. He's very slow. And he possibly has very bad eyesight. Now you might say, Troy, how do you know he's got very bad eyesight? Well, Goliath has received a lot of attention within the medical sphere, within the medical realm. You can go onto medical websites, you can go onto medical journals, and you'll see there's been a lot of medical experts and researchers that are trying to figure out what was going on with Goliath's health. One, because he's abnormally large, but two, he also shows a lot of strange behavior within the text. They ask questions like, why did Goliath, an experienced warrior, need to be led down the valley by his shield bearer? They say that's a little bit strange. Not exactly like completely ridiculous, but that's a little bit strange, they say, that he would need a shield bearer to go before him. When he's down in the valley and he sees David approaching him, he says, why are you approaching me with sticks? David had his shepherd's staff, one stick. So they say, why did Goliath ask about sticks? They say another strange thing is Goliath was taunting David to come near to him. What was common practice was he should have gone near to David. So why is he saying to David, come near to me so that I may fight you? They say that's a little bit strange. And then the last bit of really weird information is why did Goliath not react to David's sling? Right? Goliath should have known how deadly David's sling was. He's got a massive shield there in the shield bearer. Why did Goliath show absolutely no recognition of David's sling and the rock that he was about to sling towards him? People say this is a little bit of a strange behavior by Goliath. How can we explain his abnormal height and this strange behavior? Now, as I said, there's lots of speculation happening. There's lots of people, researchers have gone into the genetics of Goliath and the different genes he might have. Goliath's brother has got 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. And they're saying, okay, what genetic factor could explain his height and his brother's thing? So you can really go down that rabbit hole if you want to. It's all there. Just one possible reason that we can get into today is that Goliath had a very common form of giantism, had the most common form of giantism called acromegaly. That's just one explanation we can look at. Acromegaly is when a tumor, usually benign, grows on a person's pituitary gland, and it causes abnormal height. So there's a tick. Okay, abnormal height, acromegaly. That might be a reason. Another symptom of acromegaly is poor and slow movement. So why did Goliath need to be led down the valley into the valley, or maybe because he had acromegaly and his movement was poor and slow, and so he needed help navigating the rocks and the bumps and everything we would find in the terrain. Another symptom is double vision. That's maybe why Goliath saw David holding more than one stick. It's because he had double vision. So he saw David coming towards him with sticks. And also, the last symptom that we'll get into today is poor or very severe short-sightedness. So why did Goliath need David to come towards him? Why did Goliath not react to his sling? Well, maybe because he couldn't see it, because he had very bad eyesight, very short-sighted. So Goliath is really big, he's really slow, and he possibly can't see David very, very well. So let me ask you again, who do you think is the mighty warrior in this story? Do you really think David is the underdog? Or is there a different story that a different lesson we can learn here? Because if I was David, and I've had to kill a hungry lion that's trying to eat me for food, if I've had to try and wrestle a sheep out of the jaws of a bear, and then kill that bear because it's trying to eat me, and then I look at a tall, slow target moving towards me, who would I rather fight? Who would I rather take on? I think when David saw Goliath, I think he must have said to God, "Oh, Lord, thank you for making him so big and so slow. I can't miss. Here we go. Done." I think David, yes, he must have been nervous, but I think he must have been really, really relieved as well. Because, I mean, what is a slow target like Goliath compared to a hungry lion attacking you for food? I think David was incredibly prepared and had everything he needed to take on Goliath. So I don't think, as you can tell, I don't think this is a story of a little weak underdog boy somehow overcoming impossible odds. I'm thinking if I was a betting man, I would have put all my money on David and had a very, very peaceful night's sleep about it. I'm not sure what you think, if you would agree with me or not. So then what is the main lesson? What is the takeaway of the story? Well, there's a few that we can look into. Some giants are not as dangerous as they seem, right? That's a lesson we can get into. Don't underestimate ourselves. That's another lesson we could approach. Don't let other people's fears control us and determine how we act. That's another lesson we could get into. But the lesson that I think stands out and above all of those is this. God has already prepared and equipped us to act. God has already prepared and given us what we need to slay Goliaths, to face anything within our lives, within our communities, within our church families that are standing up against God. God's already given us what we need. He's already prepared us to slay those Goliaths. What do we need to do? We just need to put up our hands and say, I'll do it. I'll volunteer. I will take on that Goliath. What strikes me about this story that really stood out to me this last 2 weeks is how little God actually seems to be doing in the story. If you read the text, obviously God's there, obviously God's in the story, but God doesn't really seem to be intervening, doesn't really seem to be doing much. And I'd like to compare David to Moses really briefly. Are you all with me still? You're all with me still. Great. I'm hoping that Goliath there is scaring you into attention, scaring you to keep focused. With Moses, we see a very different thing to David, right? With Moses, God has he gets this amazing call from God in the burning bush moment, right? He sees this bush that's on fire, but it's not burning. He hears God calling him. He approaches the bush. God tells him, take off your sandals. This is holy ground. So he does that. And at the burning bush, he has this amazing conversation with God about his name, I am. And God tells Moses, this is what I want you to do, and this is how you're going to do it, and this is what's going to happen. And Moses is scared, he's afraid, and so God says, look at the staff in your hands, drop the staff, and he drops the staff, and it turns into a snake. And God's like, you see, this is a sign that I'm going to do everything that I'm telling you I'm going to do. And still Moses is like, God, I'm not sure about this. And so God's like, okay, Moses, take your helper, Aaron, he will help you. And so Moses goes to Pharaoh, and Moses doesn't really do much. He just confronts Pharaoh, and then God unleashes all of these miraculous plagues And then God leads the Israelites out of Egypt by a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day, and they reach the Red Sea, and what happens? All Moses does is he lifts his staff, and God parts the sea, right? The Israelites come to Moses and say, we're hungry, we're starving in the desert. So God provides manna and quail, and God just does all of these amazing things around Moses, right? With Moses, it's just like God is speaking, God is intervening, God is acting, and it's miracle, miracle, miracle. With David, we don't see any of that amazing supernatural stuff happening. Why is David at the battlefield that day? It's not because God called him. It's because David is the youngest brother, and his father says, David, I'm worried about your older brothers in the war. Please, can you go take food to them and check on them? A very ordinary, everyday thing to do. That's why David was there. Why did David volunteer to take on Goliath? It's not because God had this miraculous burning bush calling moment. No. It's because David already realized he had what he needed to take on Goliath. And he trusted God to fill in the blanks if there were any. He volunteered because he knew, okay, God has already prepared me. David wasn't given anything special for the battle. Not like Moses, a staff that can change into a snake, right? No, David already looks at his hands and he says, I've already got everything I need. My sling and my shepherd's staff. And what I don't have, the rocks are right there. I can just pick up and use them. And when he takes on Goliath, we don't see any miraculous pillars of fire and earthquakes and stuff like that. No. David does what David has done thousands of times before in his life. He flung a rock at a target. Can you imagine a shepherd boy looking after his sheep? How do you spend your days? Well, maybe I'm just going to aim at a tree. And the odd bear and lion that comes across my way, right? David did something that was very ordinary for David to do. He flung a rock at a target. Yes, that target happens to be extraordinary, happened to be Goliath, but what David did wasn't extraordinary. The only extraordinary thing I can find in the text is that David volunteered when no one else was willing to. That's what's really, really remarkable to me, is David was the one that stood up and said, right, I'm going to do this. David was prepared. David had everything he needed. And so David could just act when he saw the Goliath. And so for me, the story is saying to us that at times in our lives, we can just act on the Goliaths because God has already prepared us and given us what we need to act. We don't have to be like Moses. We don't have to wait for this calling and this miracle and all that stuff. Sometimes maybe we are in Moses' position, but I think most of the time we are in David's position. So whenever we come against something in our lives, in our community, in our church family, that God does not want there, that we know God would not like there, it can be something as abstract and serious as racism and abuse. It can be hunger, it can be poverty. It can be small things like just needing to get clothes for a person. Whatever that Goliath might be, we can say, I volunteer to take that Goliath on. Why? Because God has already prepared me and given me everything I need. Do you think that is a good lesson for us to take away this Sunday? So I've got a few minutes left, literally just one or two. So just to bring this into a very practical ending for us, just to make sure this is really grounded for us that we can rush out to in our week. What are some Goliaths that we might slay? Well, the first one that comes to mind, because we've been speaking about it, because it's front of our mind that we can look at, is Alpha. Alpha is a giant. Why do I say Alpha is a giant? Because Alpha is looking at all the thousands of people from the crags all the way through Koeni and Kwano beyond, and they're saying, how can we get all those thousands of people that do not know God, that are not living for God, that need God, that are broken, that are hopeless, that are helpless, that are hurting? How can we get all those thousands of people together who have got questions about God, that would like to know about God? How can we get them all together? And then how can we feed them physical food? But how can we also feed them spiritually? How can we teach them about God? How can we answer their questions? How can we listen to them with dignity? How can we give them love? How can we support them? How do we get all those people in? Who's going to do all of that? We can look at that and say, that's a Goliath. I can't do that. But if we look at our community, We are perfectly prepared and equipped to slay this Goliath. I mean, just look at this building. We've got an amazing kitchen there that can prepare huge amounts of food. We just need people to chop onions and chop carrots. Can you chop onions and carrots? I'm sure even the worst cook can chop some vegetables and food, right? Look at this venue. Can we not get hundreds of people into this venue? We've got the perfect equipment to play videos. We've got comfortable chairs to sit in. We can host a large amount of people. Have you ever had questions about God? Put up your hand if you've had a question about God. Okay, so we've got quite a few people who've had questions about God in your life. I promise you now, you can sit at a table with other people and listen to their questions about God. So who's going to sit at tables and lead these discussions? Well, if you're a Christian, you've got questions, you can do it. Right? How many of us have got cars that we can just drive around once a week and pick up some people? If we begin to look at what we already have, we'll see we are perfectly prepared and equipped for Alpha. What are we needing then? We're just needing people to say, I'll do it. I'll volunteer. I'll take on that Goliath. That's the only thing that's standing in the way from slaying the Goliath in that area. So that's just one example. What's another one? Well, what happens if I said to you, I want you to do something that is going to bring the community together? Young, old, rich, poor, it doesn't matter about the race. I want you to bring them all together in a way that's going to give them joy, that's going to give them happiness, that is going to get them talking and interacting, that's going to break down barriers between all these different people in our community. Would you look at me and say, oh, Troy, that's a Goliath? Yes. Let me ask you, what is the park down at Seaside Longships doing? I'm there almost every day with Piper. It's different people from different places in our community coming together. And what do? They speak and they interact and they play together. My daughter yesterday went up to a completely random family and started kicking their soccer ball. And I had to say to them, I'm so sorry. And he said, no, it's completely fine. Now suddenly I'm chatting to a person I had no clue about as our children played soccer, right? That park is breaking down Goliaths. It's defeating Goliaths. And it's being done by not a huge team of amazing resources. It's done by a few men and women that says, yes, we can paint posts. We can dig holes. We can plant plants. We can approach businesses here and there and get the resources we need. They're doing what they already know how to do. They're slaying Goliaths. What about the meal centers? The homeless shelters? Just this last week, and I'll end with this, one of our members of staff said to me, it was on Tuesday or Wednesday, you know that really cold, wet, rainy day, freezing? She noticed a kid going to school and dressed nothing but a t-shirt on that freezing cold day. And another person in our church community said to her, it's sad because we get all these adult clothes donated, but we don't get much for kids. The very next day, a business, without knowing any of this was happening, a business came in and part of their winter drive was collecting warm clothes for children. They're slaying a Goliath in their community. So wherever you are this week, my challenge to you and to myself is, what is the Goliath that you see? And then how can you slay that with what God has already prepared you with and placed in your life? If you are in a business and you work 9 to 5 and you can't go out to meal centers and do all of that, that's fine. But you can still get clothes together for all those children that are cold. You can still get food together for Alpha and for the homeless shelters. You can still raise support for things that you can do within your work. If you've got more free time, that's amazing. We're all perfectly placed and prepared and equipped already to slay Goliaths. All we have to do is look at them and say to God, okay, that's the one that I am taking on. And then we go and do it. Amen.
Thank you for joining us in listening to this message. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. In this way, you will be notified when the next message is available. Until next week, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and give you peace.